Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the quiet, creaking world of a samurai's daily life during Japan's Sengoku period, an era full of conflict, sure, but also long silences, uncomfortable sitting, and a surprising number of rules about sandals. You're not here to conquer a province or lead a charge. No, tonight you're just one humble samurai living through a day so ordinary it might just put you to sleep. The air is cool before dawn, still caught in the hush between late-night cricket song and the first bird's brave chirp. Your futon rests on a tatami mat that smells faintly of straw and smoke. Somewhere beyond the sliding door, a servant creaks by with a pail of water, and you know it's time. The routine is waiting. You roll out of bed if you can call a folded mat a bed and tuck your legs under you in that way that always makes your knees regret this profession. A low bow toward the kamidana, the tiny household shrine, comes first. It's mostly ritual at this point. You're half awake and you almost knock over the incense tray with your forehead. This happens more often than you'd admit. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I promise I'll read it with more interest than the daimyo ever reads his own scrolls. You rise, carefully. You've trained in combat strategy poetry, but nothing prepares you for early mornings in winter. Your breath fogs faintly as you pad toward the side room where the family's retained servant has set out a bowl of rice gruel miso soup and a few pickled plums that seem like they were pickled before the current shogun was born. You eat slowly in silence, not for any philosophical reason, just because your jaw still isn't fully awake. Across from you, your younger cousin is already dressed and smug about it. His top knot looks aggressively perfect. Outside, the fog is still sleeping on the low hills, and the clack of Geta sandals begins echoing faintly down the road, the neighbor's household stirring too. Somewhere in that soup of sounds is the low, drumming rhythm from the nearby temple calling monks to prayer, or warning them breakfast is burning again. Training begins before the sun breaks fully. The yard behind your residence has been raked into calming, useless patterns perfect for slipping in your sandals. Your bakken, a wooden training sword, waits on the stand. The wood is worn and familiar, though the splinter near the hilt still manages to find your thumb every other morning. You go through your forms, again and again, slower this time. It's not about speed, your instructor once said, though he said it while moving at terrifying speed. It's about balance. You swing, you step. You bow to an imaginary opponent who, unlike you, doesn't have a pebble in his sock. A mainstream fact. Most samurai were less battlefield heroes and more local bureaucrats with a sword. You might carry two blades, but most of your work will be maintaining order, collecting rice taxes, and helping settle local disputes over things like chicken ownership and fishing rights. Thrilling. The sun begins to rise, orange light filtering through pine, and already you're sweating under the many layers of formal undergarments, wrap belts, and robes. There's a sharp smell of pine resin and early morning manure drifting up from the nearby stable. That's how you know it's nearly time to report in. Historians still argue whether samurai of this rank were expected to train daily, or if such discipline was idealized in later Bushido-era documents. Either way, your back hurts. And yet, despite the aches, there's something calming about it all. The repetition, the structure, the way the sparrows seem to keep time with your footwork. Or maybe they're just mocking you. Hard to tell with sparrows. Eventually the sun is properly up. A servant clears away the remains of breakfast, and you finally sit down on the injawa, the wooden veranda facing the garden. You try to stretch without looking like you're stretching. There are rules about that too. A neighbor's rooster several hours late to its job gives one half-hearted crow. You sigh. Time to go back inside. Time to get dressed for the formal day. And know what you're wearing now doesn't count, even though you've been practicing for an hour and feel like you've just fought 3 duels with a pine tree. Inside, the household is busier now. Cloth rustles, water buckets thump. You hear someone repeating poetry lines, possibly wrong. You nod to the elderly retainer who pretends not to notice you've scuffed your socks again. There's a moment as you pass the paper walls and wooden beams of your modest home that you pause to look outside again. The fog is gone now, but the silence remains soft and slow, like the start of a very long, very predictable song. You breathe it in, and then you shuffle off to find your armor. Because nothing says good morning like spending 20 minutes trying to tie cords behind your own back while pretending you're too dignified to ask for help. The armor stand is waiting for you, like an overly formal acquaintance who insists on bowing too many times. You stare at it. It stares back, lacquered black plates, faded cords, a faint smell of oil, and that one shoulder guard that's never quite symmetrical. You begin the slow process of becoming once again the walking clatter of history. First the underlayers, a cotton kimono tied and adjusted, followed by leggings and wraps. The cords are stiff from the morning chill, and it takes 3 tries to make the knot sit right. Somewhere in the corner, your cousin coughs in a way that sounds suspiciously smug. Then the armor sun-eat for your shins, coat for your forearms, and the chest plate that never quite stops smelling like damp bamboo. You lift it, wrestle with the ties, and yes, there it is, the familiar moment when you wish the Sengoku period had Velcro. As you shift and adjust, you're reminded of a mainstream truth. Samurai armor wasn't just for show. It had to balance protection, flexibility, and occasionally fashion. Armor color combinations could indicate family rank or personal flair. Yours is technically deep river black, though your cousin insists it looks like damp plum. At last you secure your kabuto helmet. It creaks slightly as you tie the final cord beneath your chin. You are now a proud warrior who is unfortunately still not allowed to eat until your lord's message is read aloud. You trudge into the main hall, where breakfast, formal breakfast, that is, has been laid out for the household retainers and samurai in residence. Everyone is already seated in the proper Seiza posture, legs folded back, straight, expressions neutral. You join them, trying not to grunt as your knees quietly file complaints. The food is modest as expected. Barley rice, pickled daikon, and a sliver of grilled mackerel that seems more ceremonial than nutritional. You eat slowly, not just out of respect, but because tilting your head down in armor is like trying to nod while trapped in a box. Conversation is minimal. Topics include yesterday's rain, the questionable singing voice of the neighbor's apprentice, and whether anyone remembers who left a sandal in the rice storeroom. Your response is a non-committal grunt. It's a perfectly acceptable form of communication before the third bite of daikon. Now and then someone bows, then someone else bows, then the entire table bows again. It's a small dance of etiquette that would confuse any outsider, but here it's second nature. You lose track of what you're bowing for, and at one point nearly bow to a bowl. One fringe tidbit: during the Sengoku period, some samurai reportedly used folding fans, not only for signaling in battle, but also to express disdain during conversation, like sighing with accessories. You consider this as your cousin launches into a story about a deer that chased him last week. You unfold your fans silently. After the meal, you rise awkwardly. Standing in armor from Seiza position is like solving a physical puzzle. There's no graceful way to do it. The floorboard creaks just enough to announce that your right foot fell asleep halfway through breakfast. You make your way to the letter room. The walls here are lined with scrolls, ink brushes, and a heavy wooden desk that smells like cedar and centuries of passive-aggressive correspondence. You're here for a reason. Your lord has dictated a response to a neighboring retainer about border patrol rotations. You're not allowed to compose the letter yourself. You merely copy it in impeccable brushstrokes, praying you don't sneeze halfway through a character. Historians still argue whether samurai engaged with written bureaucratic tasks on a regular basis, or if these duties were more commonly assigned to clerks. In your case, you do the copying while the actual clerk naps lightly behind a screen. Very convenient. You steady your hand, dip the brush, and begin the delicate dance of kanji across parchment. The characters must flow like water, even if the message they carry is bone dry. To Lord Ishikawa's third retainer of the Western Ridge, we acknowledge receipt of your message concerning water rights near the third cedar boundary. While your concern is noted, our patrols observed no such leakage. Kindly refrain from rerouting streams without prior notice. Yes, riveting. You set the brush down and gently blow on the ink, staring at the scroll like it might reveal a hidden poem. It does not. A knock at the door. One of the younger retainers enters and bows. "It is time for inspection," he says with the enthusiasm of someone about to organize a rock collection. You nod solemnly. Inspection is important. Also long. Also silent. But mostly long. You and 3 others file outside into the sunlit courtyard where horses are being walked in a circle for no particular reason, and a stack of spears is being checked for presents. You pick up a spear, look at it meaningfully, and put it down. Congratulations, you've inspected something. A slight breeze rustles the flags on the gate. A cricket hops across the gravel path and pauses dramatically on your boot. You do not move, neither does the cricket. For a moment, you are both locked in a mutual understanding of complete and utter stillness. Eventually, the bell chimes again. Time for the midday assignments. You bow to your superior, who nods gravely at a roster scroll and assigns you the task of verifying the inventory of arrowheads. You try not to sigh audibly. Arrowheads again. Still, there's something oddly soothing about the repetition, the routine of binding cloth cords, polishing lacquered surfaces, counting sharp things in a non-combative context. You and another retainer spend nearly 45 minutes in comfortable silence tallying the stockpile while discussing whether pickled plum juice is good for headaches. The answer, unclear, but very tart. As you finish, a soft bell rings again in the distance. It's not loud, but it echoes a soft reminder that the afternoon awaits, and with it, a patrol that, based on past experience, will involve more dust than danger. You sigh, stretch your back until it pops in 3 places, and turn toward the stable. Somewhere in that endless sameness is the comfort of knowing what comes next, even if it's just another goose-related incident waiting to happen. The sun is now high and bright enough to make your helmet feel like a mobile steam pot. You squint into the courtyard where your patrol group is already forming in a quiet, resigned line. Horses snort gently, stamping in the dust, while one particularly disinterested mule watches a butterfly with the detachment of a retired scholar. Your horse is named Coma, which means pony, though he is neither small nor particularly cooperative. He sidesteps just enough to make mounting him feel like a test of character. You swing your leg up with practiced grace, then spend the next few seconds adjusting your armor, your scabbard, and your pride. And off you go. A slow trot out of the compound gates, past the lacquered Tory archway, past the bored guards with spears they haven't used in 3 weeks. Beyond the stone walls, the countryside rolls gently. Rice paddies shimmering in neat rows, narrow dirt paths snaking through low green hills, and the occasional villager pausing to bow as you pass. You bow back, of course, nearly knocking your helmet into your horse's mane. Dignity? Optional. Today's assignment is to inspect the outer boundary villages and make sure no one is accidentally or intentionally harboring bandits, rebellious ronin, or suspiciously fat chickens. The idea is noble. The reality is hot and dusty, and mostly involves making polite conversation with elderly farmers who think you're from the tax office. You dismount for the first inspection, a sleepy farmhouse where the oldest resident swears on his favorite radish that he hasn't seen a bandit since the year of the missing duck. You nod solemnly. You record this statement in your notebook, where it joins a proud list that includes nothing to report except 3 goats and bandits, no, just my son-in-law. A mainstream historical fact, samurai often functioned more as administrators or regional enforcers than full-time warriors, especially during quieter phases of the Sengoku period. Many spent more time sorting disputes over irrigation than wielding their swords in battle. Today is no exception. You rejoin the group, trotting along the edge of a paddy field where a group of children are chasing each other with sticks, pretending to be warriors. You consider telling them not to run with wooden swords, but then remember your own childhood. Fewer rice paddies, more bruises. Still, you manage a stern glance at the one pretending to be a warlord with a bucket on his head. Patrol continues. You visit 3 more farmsteads, 1 temple where you politely decline tea in the interest of discipline though, mostly because the tea smelled suspiciously of radish, and an abandoned shrine where one of your group insists he heard a fox spirit giggle. You say nothing, but quietly note that he hasn't slept well in days. Quirky tidbit of the day, in some rural areas, minor samurai officials were expected to help resolve arguments over songbird ownership. Yes, songbirds. You're thankful that today's patrol involves nothing louder than a sneezy ox and a monk who waves at everyone, even the horses. After 3 hours, you stop for lunch beneath a cluster of pines. The bento your housemaid packed includes cold rice, pickled burdock root, and a rice ball that's still warm, bless her. You sit on a mossy log while one of your companions tries to use his wakizashi to slice a peach and ends up launching it into the underbrush. A brief search party is formed and the peach is declared lost in service. You finish your rice and look at the sky. Clouds are gathering slow and fat, but not yet serious, just dramatic enough to make the landscape look vaguely like a scroll painting. Historians still argue whether samurai patrols were as frequent and structured as later texts suggest, or whether these routines were exaggerated during the Tokugawa era to emphasize Bushido ideals. Either way, your legs hurt from trotting and your neck is sunburnt. This feels real enough. Your final stop is a tiny border hut staffed by a half-blind gatekeeper and a goose named Toshio, who has been in charge since a local official made a joke 4 months ago and no one corrected it. Toshio honks authoritatively as you approach. You bow. The goose does not return the gesture. Any suspicious travelers you ask mostly out of habit. The gatekeeper scratches his beard and shrugs. One monk seemed harmless, smelled like fish. You nod as if this is vital intelligence. The return ride is quieter. Your group meanders down the main path past temple bells and swaying bamboo, each member lost in their own saddle-sore thoughts. One hums an old war ballad under his breath, but softly, like he's trying not to wake the clouds. You pass a roadside shrine where someone has left fresh mochi, a sign of either devotion or a forgetful snack thief. Either way, you pause to straighten the offering before continuing. As the sun tips slightly westward, casting gold across the fields, you approach the outer gate of your compound. A final stretch of silence hangs in the air. Even your horse seems to exhale. Back inside, you dismount, hand off the reins to a waiting stable boy, and stretch like a man twice your age. Your knees crack like old wood, and a crow cackles somewhere above as if it noticed. Your armor feels heavier now, not with fatigue, but with a long day of doing just enough. Not glory, not disgrace, just steady, repetitive purpose. You bow toward the house again, toward the courtyard, and then, because it's habit now, toward the stable cat. She ignores you entirely. You've still got chores ahead, reports to file, tea to endure, and eventually a bath with several other people who will pretend not to look at the mole on your shoulder. But for now, you stand for a brief moment under the fading sun and enjoy the simple, ridiculous triumph of having completed a patrol where nothing really happened. You barely get your boots off before someone hands you a scroll. It's tied with blue cord, which means it's not urgent, just ceremonial. Possibly about roofing tiles or someone's concern about the smell of incense during last week's temple gathering. You tuck it into your sash and pretend you'll read it later, which, to be fair, you probably will. Eventually. First, the sword rack. You unfasten your katana and wakizashi and place them with care, blade side up, hilts angled toward your dominant hand just in case. It's not paranoia, it's protocol. That, and you once dropped your sword during a guest inspection and nearly decapitated a potted plant. The courtyard is empty now, save for a few drifting leaves and a pair of servants beating dust out of floor mats with sticks that look suspiciously satisfying to wield. You nod politely, receive matching nods, and shuffle off to record your uneventful patrol into an uneventful ledger maintained by a very eventful spiderweb in the corner. You sit. You write. You stifle a yawn. There are only so many ways to phrase inspected perimeter. No signs of disturbance. Goose remains hostile. Your handwriting grows increasingly loopy until your signature looks like it was drawn by a tipsy crane. A bell rings again. Not the food bell, not the prayer bell, the you are expected to attend something bell. You sigh, adjust your robes, and rise once again. This time it's for poetry hour. Technically it's not required, but your Lord enjoys it, and when your Lord enjoys something, it tends to become heavily encouraged. Which is how you now find yourself seated on a polished floor next to 3 other samurai who all look equally unsure about whether their latest haiku about river mist sounds meditative or like someone describing a wet sock. A senior retainer clears his throat and begins to recite, "Morning fog descends." Even the frog stops speaking. "Did I feed the horse?" There's a moment of reverent silence, then soft applause. You add a polite, that suggests deep contemplation. Your turn comes. You open the scroll you scribbled last week and pretend it's fresh. "In armor, I sit. Not a battle in 3 weeks. Tea still tastes like dirt." A few heads nod, one chuckle escapes. You bow slightly and let the scroll roll closed. You've survived worse. A mainstream fact to anchor this scene during the Sengoku period, many samurai were trained not only in martial arts, but also in calligraphy, tea ceremony, and yes, poetry. Cultural refinement was expected. A warrior who couldn't string together a few reflective lines about nature was considered unfinished, even uncouth. Still, you suspect that the guy 2 mats over copied his poem from a bathhouse door. That's between him and his conscience. You leave the poetry hall just as the sun begins its lazy dip behind the hills. Lanterns are being lit, paper orbs glowing like soft moons against the dimming sky. Their warm orange light catches the gentle sway of pine needles. In the distance, you hear the faint clang of a dropped bucket and someone muttering apologies to a very confused dog. It's bath time. You trudge to the Sento, the communal bathhouse, where your armor and pride are both left neatly outside. You slip into the warm water with an audible sigh, every joint in your body letting go of the day's formality. Across from you, one of your fellow retainers is already half asleep, his hair bunched like a sleeping cat on his head. The water smells faintly of yuzu and old sandalwood. Steam curls upward like a ghost, unsure of its purpose. The walls echo with the quiet drip of wooden ladles and the occasional squeak of a bamboo pipe that insists on announcing itself every 5 minutes. One quirky tidbit: some samurai bathhouses use special scented oils to indicate rank. You're currently steeping in junior status citrus, which at least smells better than last week's plum and disappointment. After the bath, you dry off with thin linen that does almost nothing, and shuffle back to your quarters wearing yukata, a soft robe that always threatens to untie at the worst moment. You eat your evening meal on the Engawa again, rice, grilled fish, and a pickled thing you don't recognize but chew anyway out of politeness. The house is quieter now. Even the clatter of plates feels muted. Lanterns sway gently in the breeze, casting shadowy silhouettes across the sliding screens. Your cousin's exaggerated sword poses mostly, or perhaps a cat hunting something invisible. Historians still argue whether evening rituals like this were universal among all ranks of samurai, or just practiced by the more affluent retainers under wealthy lords. Regardless, for you, this is how the day slows, predictable, precise, and strangely soothing. You kneel at the kamedana once more, offering a final bow and a small dish of rice. A prayer whispered not for victory but for more quiet days like this. Days where no arrows flew, no shoguns summoned, and no one spilled ink on the floor scrolls. You blow out the candle. Outside, a night insect calls once, then twice. The stars have appeared in their usual disorganized pattern. You lie back on your mat, one hand resting loosely atop your scabbard, more from habit than fear. There is peace in repetition, peace in the mundane. In armor you live today, but now in the gentle embrace of silence and sleep. You drift toward the next sunrise, where you will once again be asked to bow 7 times before breakfast and find out if Toshio the goose has declared war on the neighbor's rooster. The final bell of the evening is soft, almost embarrassed to interrupt the peace. It hums from the far side of the compound near the garden, where the moon is beginning to reflect gently in the still pond bordered by stones. You've never seen anyone move, but somehow always shift just slightly each season. You rise one last time for the day, not out of necessity but ritual. The body knows its rhythm now. Sleep doesn't come until the steps are completed. The lantern is lit outside your chamber door. The shutters adjusted to let in just enough moonlight. Blade polished briefly with cloth and breath, then placed on its low wooden stand. Your final task is the poetry journal. Just a few lines, nothing formal. Some days it's blank. Other days it's full of nonsense about bugs and sandals. But tonight you write, "Lantern light flickers. Even silence bows deeply before dreams arrive." You don't even reread it. You just close the book. Tuck it beneath your futon and return to the sliding door. You pause there. Through a crack you glimpse the distant hillside, the same view you've seen since childhood. Pine trees like ink, brush strokes, thin mist curling over rooftops, and that one crooked chimney that's always let out more smoke than it should. A sleepy, wheezing thing. Inside the room glows faintly from a paper lantern. Your bedding has been turned down, your armor tucked away, your sandals finally at rest. You kneel, bow toward the Kamidana once more, slowly this time, like the gesture itself might exhale and then stretch out on the futon with a sigh. A mainstream historical fact, though not widely romanticized, samurai were expected to sleep lightly often with their swords within reach, and to rise quickly if summoned even in the dead of night. You, however, have not been summoned in 3 months. The closest you've come was a dream about trying to write poetry while being chased by a rooster. You shift onto your side. You can hear the wind now, soft against the bamboo walls, rustling the trees with the gentlest of whispers. The floor creaks once as someone somewhere returns late from guard duty. And yet sleep doesn't arrive just yet. Your mind flickers through fragments of the day, the awkward poetry hour, the goose that wouldn't salute, the moment your armor pinched your shoulder during bow practice. All stitched together into the fabric of a day so ordinary it becomes sacred in its quiet routine. There's something reassuring in knowing what tomorrow will look like, something soothing about the repetition. Historians still argue whether samurai found joy in this monotony, or if they quietly rebelled in small ways. An extra rice ball, an overly elaborate tea whisk, flourish a secretly unfinished poem. You suspect it's all three. A candle gutters in the hallway. The sound of sandals brushing against stone fades into nothing. A nearby pine creaks like an old man telling a story that only the wind remembers. You allow yourself one more breath, then another. And slowly, softly, the edges of the world blur. Your hand, still resting on the futon's edge, slips downward slightly. The fabric beneath your cheek is warm now from your own breath. The flickering lantern finally dies out in the corner. The house sleeps. The trees sleep. Even the goose, for now, sleeps. And you, loyal retainer, weary poet, reluctant patrol leader, finally close your eyes. Let everything soften now. You've walked through the dust of ancient paths, bowed through layers of ceremony, and endured one too many pickled vegetables for a single day. Your armor is off. Your sword is quiet, and even the restless thoughts of tomorrow's responsibilities are starting to fade like mist across a rice field. Let your breathing slow. Let it match the gentle rhythm of the wind that rustles the paper lanterns. Each breath a falling leaf, each exhale a pine needle sliding gently to the floor. Outside, the moon is rising just enough to cast faint shadows on the Ngawa, where the cat sleeps curled in a perfect circle. Somewhere a nightbird sings once, then stops as if it too remembered the hour and chose rest instead. The scent of old wood, warmed by body heat and candle smoke, lingers faintly in the air. It's familiar now, comforting like a quiet hand on your shoulder, or the weight of a folded kimono across your chest. Let that warmth wrap around you. Let your limbs sink deeper into the futon. There's no more bowing tonight, no poetry to recall, no goose to interrogate, only stillness, only silence, only the long, gentle drift toward dreams where even swords might dream of dew on bamboo, of distant bells, of slow mornings, where nothing is expected except a quiet breath, and maybe, if you're lucky, an extra plum in your rice. Sleep now, little warrior. You've done enough. The sun won't rise for hours yet, and even when it does, it will wait. We're traveling to a sleepy Sicilian hillside where the air smells faintly of lemon blossoms, old stones, and on most days, freshly baked bread. But not today. It's Tuesday, and in this particular village, the bakeries are closed. Not for a holiday, not for restocking, just because it's Tuesday. You walk along a cobbled path, shoes making soft scuffing sounds past shuttered windows and quiet piazzas. There's no smoke rising from the chimneys of the forno, no early morning clatter of rolling pins, just silence broken only by the occasional coo of a pigeon and the faint authoritative rustle of someone sweeping a church step with unnecessary focus. And you wonder, was there a flour shortage, a union strike, a holy day no one remembers? Nope. It's much weirder than that. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere equally sleepy, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all watching from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've arrived in the village of Bavona, not far from Palermo, but far enough that maps get vague, and everyone swears they know a better route than the next guy. Here, Tuesday has a reputation. On any other day, the square would smell of olive oil and yeast, but today the air feels a bit tentative, like even the breeze knows it's not supposed to encourage rising dough. You poke your head into a darkened bakery where a striped cat is curled on the flour-dusted counter, possibly on purpose. The owner, Signor Pino, leans in from the doorway behind, wiping his hands on a towel that's seen better centuries. "No bread on Tuesdays," he mutters, almost like a warning. "Not since the dough turned on us." You blink. The dough turned. He doesn't elaborate. He just gestures toward a low wooden stool and pours you a small cup of anise tea. It tastes vaguely like a licorice that forgot it was supposed to be sweet. Historians still argue whether this No Tuesday rule originated in the 1300s or was invented sometime later, perhaps after a particularly lazy baker misread the calendar. What is documented is that by the late medieval period, certain Sicilian towns had developed highly specific superstitions around food preparation. One mainstream fact: bread was sacred, literally. Some monasteries reserved their finest flour just to bake host wafers for Mass, but outside the cloister walls, your average Sicilian peasant treated bread with a mix of reverence, suspicion, and mild indigestion. Bread was blessed, buried, gifted to saints, and most importantly, never wasted, which makes it all the stranger that one day a whole village would just stop needing it on a perfectly good Tuesday. A fringe theory claims it all began after a local baker's sourdough starter rose overnight into the shape of a bishop's hat. Not just once, 3 Tuesdays in a row. That baker, fearing divine interference, reportedly tossed it into the river where it allegedly floated upstream. A goose watched, probably judging. There's a plaque somewhere near that river now. It says nothing about the bread. It just reads, "Do not feed the ducks," but the locals know. A group of modern folklorists once tried to interview elderly residents about the tradition. They got vague answers. The dough becomes restless on Tuesday. The yeast dreams in strange directions. My cousin once tried. His rolls exploded. And of course, everyone mentions the Tuesday. No one quite agrees which Tuesday. Some say it was in 1348, which is suspiciously close to the year the Black Death arrived. Others swear it was in 1472, the year an eclipse passed overhead, and a baker's apprentice reportedly fainted into a sack of flour, disappearing entirely. Did the town collectively hallucinate a bread-based disaster? Did someone confuse bad fermentation with bad omens? Possibly. But as you walk past shuttered storefronts and half-closed wooden doors, there's a kind of dreamy cohesion to it all. Like everyone agreed centuries ago not to tempt fate with gluten, just for one day a week. You pass a small shrine built into the corner of a wall. Inside, a miniature loaf molded in clay. Someone's replaced its halo with a bottle cap. A candle flickers beside it, maybe out of respect, maybe to keep the pigeons away. You begin to suspect that no one actually believes the myth, not anymore, but they also don't disbelieve it enough to start kneading dough on a Tuesday. And so the ovens cool, the yeast sleeps, and the village holds its breath until Wednesday. You're still sitting on the stool in Signor Pino's bakery sipping your anise tea like it's a sacrament. The cat shifts slightly, revealing a patch of dough stuck to its side, dried like plaster. Pino doesn't acknowledge it. He just stares into the middle distance and begins without invitation to tell you about Il Prete dell'Impasto, the dough priest. Now is this man a documented figure? Not exactly. Historians still argue whether the so-called dough priest was a real cleric, a metaphor for bad baking, or simply a bored monk who spent too much time near wheat. But in Bavona, they whisper his name the way one might talk about old stains on a tablecloth, reluctantly and with no intention of scrubbing further. It begins, as all half-myths do, with a winter that wouldn't leave. Back in the late 1200s or maybe early 1400s, depending on which aunt you ask, the village was gripped by a cold so stubborn that even the garlic froze. People huddled around their ovens, not for cooking, but for warmth. And during one particularly dull Tuesday, the town's baker came to the chapel in desperation. "We have no more dough," he told the priest, "only flour and prayers." The priest, young, ambitious, and possibly suffering from yeast exposure, offered to bless what little remained. But instead of performing a standard blessing, he insisted on kneading it himself. He called it divine touch fermentation. He rolled up his sleeves, chanted something vaguely Latin. Some say it was just a recipe for lentil stew, and began kneading with the flair of someone who'd never touched dough in his life. What came out of that oven several hours later was not bread. It was something else. The loaves were shaped like unfamiliar letters. The crust shimmered oddly. One had a perfect indentation in the shape of a thumb, yet the priest swore he'd worn gloves. The bread was shared among villagers hesitantly. The next day, the snow melted. Just a bit. Birds returned. A goat gave birth to triplets, which may not sound dramatic, but they were all the same exact shade of beige, which unnerved several locals. They began to believe the priest had some kind of divine baking power. The bishop of Palermo was notified. He sent 2 monks to investigate. The monks left 3 days later after reportedly witnessing a dough ball roll uphill unaided. One mainstream historical fact that aligns loosely with this tale in many parts of medieval Europe bread-making was regulated not just by guilds but by the church. The spiritual and the yeasty were often kneaded together. Priests did bless bread. Saints were associated with grain harvests. A few miracle stories even involve loaves multiplying on altars. But what makes Bavona's dough priest strange is what happened after. He began holding special kneading services every Tuesday morning. No hymns, just rhythmic thumping and murmured invocations to Saint Softcrumb. Flour dust floated through the chapel like incense. One parishioner described it as deeply moving, but I left sneezing. Of course, things went sideways. They always do. At some point, a batch went bad. The dough reportedly hissed during baking. One loaf exploded in the shape of a fish. Another burned a perfect ring into the oven stone, which no one could scrub away. The priest, shaken but undeterred, declared it a test of faith. Then he vanished. Was it shame divine calling an unfortunate accident involving a sack of barley and a low beam? No one knows. All that was found was his apron folded neatly on the chapel floor beside an untouched mound of dough. The villagers took it as a sign, or maybe just a good excuse. Either way, from that Tuesday forward, no one needed dough. Not on that day, not ever again. And in typical medieval fashion, no one wrote it down in detail. The only semi-reliable reference comes from a tax ledger that lists absence of bread Tuesday under a baker's name, followed by a curious note, "Blessed be the silence of ovens." Centuries later, when a group of Napoleonic soldiers passed through and tried to order focaccia on a Tuesday, they were politely directed to a goat shed instead. The soldiers, confused but very tired, accepted this without argument. Even now, some elderly villagers claim that if you try to bake on a Tuesday, the dough won't rise. Not out of physics, just pure stubbornness. One modern baker reportedly tested this by preparing identical dough batches every day for a week. The Tuesday loaf flat, she said, like a sandal. Is it true? Science says no, but dough, as any baker will tell you, has a mood. As you leave Pino's bakery and step back into the sunlight, the village seems unchanged, but a little more mysterious. A soft breeze brushes your face, carrying the scent of something almost bread-like, but not quite. Maybe memory, maybe myth. You find yourself walking slowly through the village square where the paving stones are uneven and a little too conversational. There's a bench under a fig tree, so crooked it seems to sigh when you sit on it. This is where, according to local rumor, the apprentice once saw the buns. Yes, the buns. He wasn't a particularly good apprentice. His name might have been Carlo, or possibly Tino, or maybe both. Historians still argue whether the boy ever existed, or if he was just an allegory for poor ventilation in early medieval kitchens. But in the version the villagers still tell, he was 16, perpetually covered in flour and possessed of a deeply unfortunate singing voice. One Tuesday, the master baker, long retired now, but still known by the nickname Il Bronzino, due to his refusal to smile, told the apprentice to prepare the morning buns. Simple enough. Same flour, same yeast, same oven, nothing new, just a batch of comforting familiarity. Except it wasn't. According to the apprentice's account, which was later half-written in a margin of a market receipt, the dough didn't behave. It leaned slightly to the left. It clung to the mixing bowl like it was afraid. When shaped into buns, the pieces began to puff unusually fast, rising in odd spirals, then collapsing into flat, frowning ovals. The real problem began when they were pulled from the oven. The apprentice claimed quite seriously that the buns formed faces, small pinched ones. Some had one eye larger than the other. One looked exactly like the village tax collector. Another resembled a pig wearing a bishop's hat. And a third, well, the apprentice refused to describe it, only saying, it looked back. Now, is this true? No. Obviously not. Probably not. It depends on how much you trust the testimony of a teenager whose primary job was cleaning egg off ladles. But still, the village noticed. Some customers refused to buy the batch. Others came from neighboring towns just to see the buns. One priest was heard muttering that the dough seemed to contain opinions. A goat reportedly fainted, though goats faint often, and for very little reason. The buns were buried, quietly. One fringe theory found in a very obscure culinary manuscript from Palermo suggests the buns may have fermented too long and developed unusual air bubbles that resembled facial features. Another theory involves cursed cinnamon. No one agrees. What's important is what followed: a series of unremarkable misfortunes. That afternoon, it rained sideways. Not hard, just sideways. A woman dropped an entire wheel of cheese down a well. The village bell began ringing once every 23 minutes, then stopped for a week. The watermill turned in reverse for an hour. Historians still debate whether these events were recorded at all, or whether the villagers simply decided in typical medieval fashion to blame the pastry. The town held a meeting in the courtyard of the church. Everyone brought something mildly edible. Someone tried to bring the buns, but they were already 6 feet under. They concluded after a long pause and a short prayer that the buns were telling them something. What exactly, no one agreed on. But the baker Il Bronzino announced that he would no longer bake on Tuesdays, and just like that, everyone else followed. One mainstream fact buried in this tale: in many medieval communities, especially in southern Europe, foodstuffs were interpreted as signs. Cracked eggs, oddly shaped vegetables, rising dough, all could be omens. Bakers were sometimes called to weigh in on village disputes, not because they were wise, but because their bread read the air. You stretch a little under the fig tree. Above you, a pigeon flutters down and sits beside you on the bench. It seems uninterested in the story, or perhaps it knows it already. Around the corner, you hear a soft voice humming. Someone's shaping clay into bread loaves for a school art project, maybe. Or maybe just out of tradition. The buns of Tuesday, they're called now. Children paint smiley faces on them during village festivals. It's said, if you make yours too lifelike, you must sleep with it in a box for 3 days. No one knows why. No one wants to ask. And the real apprentice. If he ever existed, he left town shortly after Bun Day. Some say he joined a monastery and baked communion wafers so thin they blew away in the wind. Others say he became a poet and refused to rhyme out of spite. But the buns, those strange risen things, are remembered. A caution, a charm, a weekly excuse not to turn on the oven. And as you get up from the bench, you swear you hear a faint pop from a nearby window, like dough deflating or yawning. The town council meets in a long, low-ceilinged room above the old olive press. You shuffle inside with a crowd of locals, many of whom seem to be here not for the discussion, but for the folding chairs, which are comfortable in the way only things made of dented wood and silent judgment can be. You sit beside an elderly woman knitting something that may be a hat or possibly a tiny net. She offers you a lozenge and whispers, "This'll take a while." You believe her. On the docket Tuesday, baking again. Yes, still. Because although everyone in the village agrees on not baking on Tuesdays, they no longer agree on why. And every few years, like clockwork, or in this case like sundial work, someone proposes revisiting the rule. Today, it's Signora Gilda, who recently returned from Palermo and claims modern yeast doesn't recognize old superstitions. Her statement causes a sharp intake of breath from at least 4 grandmothers and 1 man who raises goats. The mayor clears his throat. As we all know, he says, reading from a handwritten note that looks like it's been used as a coaster, Tuesday has traditionally been doughless, but we are here to consider whether buns baked on a Tuesday can be safe provided they are made with organic flour. The knitting woman beside you snorts. Organic. As if spirits care about pesticides. And so begins the Great Tuesday debate. Again. One mainstream fact emerges from the opening argument: food taboos were surprisingly common in medieval towns. In parts of Germany, for example, fish was avoided on certain saint days. In Ethiopia, fasting periods altered local diets for nearly half the calendar year. Superstitions became embedded in scheduling, creating entire rhythms of life built around safe and unsafe days. But here in Bavona, things veer into the delightfully absurd. Gilda proposes a Tuesday trial bake monitored by a neutral party. This suggestion prompts Signor Lupo, a retired baker, to shout, "I'll never trust a bun that speaks." No one laughs. Apparently everyone remembers the incident, even if they've long stopped talking about it. You raise your hand. No one notices. You lower it again and instead focus on the town clerk, who has begun reading aloud from a diary reportedly written by someone's great-great-aunt Maria of the rolling pin. Maria, it turns out, kept detailed notes on every dough-related event in the village, including a curious Tuesday when the loaves reportedly refused to brown and instead developed a faint green hue. No illnesses were reported, but 1 chicken laid an egg shaped like a cube that week, and the village never fully recovered. A fringe theory floated gently by a man in the back wearing 2 scarves suggests the Tuesday curse stems from lunar cycles. He believes dough is sensitive to moonlight, especially when Venus is in something. He doesn't finish the sentence. A goat bleats outside. The timing is suspicious. As the debate rolls on, the knitting woman beside you whispers, "Last time they tried to bake on a Tuesday, the focaccia was too fluffy. It disturbed people." Too fluffy, you ask. She nods, like it wanted to escape, and in a way that's the heart of it. The village isn't worried about dough that won't rise. They're worried about dough that wants to, dough that remembers, dough that holds grudges. Historians still argue whether Bavona's No Tuesday rule was ever official or just an incredibly consistent habit. Some claim it was enforced by the church. Others say it was local guild policy. One surviving record from 1573 simply reads, Tuesday silence in the oven, Wednesday atonement through ciabatta. The council ultimately decides after 3 hours and a small snack break involving olives and unseasoned goat cheese that nothing will change. Tuesdays will remain doughless. Gilda nods, accepts her defeat, and declares she will instead ferment sourdough emotionally. Everyone claps politely. A small boy in the corner eats a carrot. And you leave the meeting not with answers, but with a profound sense that certainty has never been the point. It's not about fear, it's about rhythm, about tradition, about leaving just one day each week for the dough to rest undisturbed. Because what if it's watching? The knitting woman pats your arm and says, some stories aren't meant to be solved, just told, like bedtime tales or taxes. And as the sun dips low over the rooftops and shadows stretch like lazy cats across the cobblestones, you walk past shuttered bakeries once more. The windows are clean, the shelves are bare, and somewhere just faintly you hear the crinkle of a recipe torn in half. No one bakes on Tuesday, not even now. The next morning arrives so gently you almost miss it. A low breeze slips through the alleyways of Bavona, smelling faintly of fennel and flour that's just beginning to wake up. The bells ring, a sleepy two-note pattern from the chapel tower, and you stroll the cobbled streets with the quiet confidence of someone who has absolutely no intention of needing anything. It's Wednesday, and today the ovens return. You peek into one bakery after another. Aprons are tied, wood is stacked, and hands are dusted with flour like an ancient rite. But there's still a hush about it, a kind of collective sigh as though everyone tiptoes around Tuesday's ghost. Not that they talk about it directly, that would be uncouth. Instead, they say things like, the dough is behaving today, or nothing odd in the mixer this time. One baker swears her starter had a restful night. Another pats her baguette batch and mutters, good lads. But something lingers. You stop at a small shop run by an old woman named Rosalia. She's lived here all her life, and her bread has a reputation for being just serious enough. You compliment her crust, and she rewards you with a small pointed smile. You should have come yesterday, she says, placing a bun wrapped in brown paper into your hands. Nothing to see, of course, but some of us still listen for signs. She doesn't explain what signs. She doesn't have to. One mainstream historical fact about bread in the Middle Ages, it wasn't just sustenance, it was status structure, even superstition. In some villages, black bread was for the poor, white bread for the noble, and rye bread for the days when the miller was grumpy. There were rules about slicing it, blessing it, even stacking it. In short, bread mattered, maybe too much. Which might explain how one day of the week got caught in a village's collective nervous system. The bakeries in Bavona all post signs in their windows handwritten in fading ink, sometimes framed, sometimes taped to the glass with pride. Each one different, but with the same message. No dough on Tuesdays. Some add flourishes, respect tradition, for your own safety. Ask the buns. You pass by a young apprentice dusting trays outside a storefront. She's humming softly and stops when you ask if she's ever baked on a Tuesday. She smiles awkwardly. Only once. For a school project. The crust peeled off in one piece, like a mask. She laughs nervously. You don't. And as the morning stretches onward, you find yourself at the edge of the village near the stream where the legendary sourdough was once tossed. It's quiet here too. Birds flutter through lemon trees. A small sign warns you not to throw anything into the water. A larger sign below it reads, Tuesday is a closed door. Scholars who visit Bavona still puzzle over the tradition. Some chalk it up to a forgotten food safety law. Others suggest a village-wide prank that became religion. A few argue it's just convenient one extra day off for sleepy bakers. But none of that explains the persistence the poems etched into the stone benches or the fact that even tourists feel a tiny prickle of guilt biting into a roll on a Tuesday. One folklorist tried to debunk the whole thing with a documentary. He baked a roll on a Tuesday and filmed himself eating it beside the chapel. He sneezed halfway through and dropped the roll. A pigeon carried it away. No one ever found the footage. You think back to all the odd details, the buns with faces, the vanished priest, the faint green crust, the debate featuring a goat and a lunar enthusiast. None of it makes sense, and yet it fits together like poorly kneaded dough, uneven, a bit lumpy, but somehow satisfying. So you sit beside the stream paper-wrapped bun in your lap and listen to the water burble. It says nothing, but you feel, rather than hear the rhythm of a place that once feared its own flower. The myth lives on, not because it's true, but because it's comfortable. Because silence in the oven one day a week feels like a kindness, like letting the ingredients rest, like giving the yeast a break from whatever dreams it might be having, and maybe, just maybe, the dough appreciates it. Hey guys, tonight we're going to Rome, but not the postcard version, not the one with chariots, emperors, and togas, or scenes from gladiator movies. No, we're going to the quieter Rome, the worn-down, bird-loud, bread-smelling city that exists the day before things become dramatic. The Rome that's still buttoning its tunic, yawning at the Forum, and wondering whether the rumors about that Hun fellow are just bad gossip or slightly worse gossip. You'll walk its cracked streets, nod at your neighbors, and try not to trip on stray olive pits. You'll notice the statues leaning a bit more than usual, and you'll do what everyone in late-stage empire tends to do best: absolutely nothing useful. Of course, you probably wouldn't survive a day here, not because of Attila, but because the bathroom situation is ambitious. Still, we're here for the vibe, not the hygiene. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up on a straw-stuffed mattress in a fifth-floor walk-up that technically counts as an apartment if you squint at it with 5th-century optimism. The room smells faintly of vinegar and optimism. Outside, the rooftops are a sleepy patchwork of tile and moss. You can hear the bakery 2 alleys down already thumping out the morning bread. You rub your eyes and try to remember what day it is. Thursday number Saturn's day, number the day before. Something. The streets feel unusually talkative for this early hour. You lean out the window and see your neighbor Lucia feeding old beans to a goat. She squints up at you and yells. They say he's got dogs with him, war dogs, as big as donkeys. You blink. Lucia tends to exaggerate. She once told you that her cousin's cousin saw a fish scream. But still, people have been murmuring all week about Attila the Hun. Not shouting, not panicking, just murmuring. It's the Roman way. Panic, yes, but only after lunch. You throw on a tunic that used to be white and start the day with a heel of stale bread dipped in watered wine. It's chewy in the way that builds jaw strength. You pass a man trying to sell a spoon that he swears is blessed by Jupiter. It looks suspiciously like a regular spoon. Down the block, 2 city cleaners are arguing about whether Huns eat bricks or just horses. One of them gestures to the aqueduct like it personally insulted him. The other shrugs and spits into the drain. It's not fear exactly, more like historical inconvenience. The baker's stall is open. You stand in line between a monk holding a basket of onions and a child trying to trade a rock for a biscuit. The baker, Faustinus, has bags under his eyes and flour in his beard. He's not coming, he mutters as he tears off a piece of barley loaf for you. Attila. He's got better cities to burn. That's comforting, you say. Faustinus shrugs. Besides, it's Thursday. No one invades on a Thursday. Too humid. You nod like that makes sense. Maybe it does. You've never tried invading anything. As you walk through the marketplace, you catch glimpses of ordinary strangeness, a woman loudly bartering for pickled lark eggs, a young man rehearsing a play about Neptune getting stuck in a bath, and a vendor selling official Hun repellent, which looks suspiciously like perfume and probably just masks the smell of fear. The statue of Marcus Aurelius in the square has been adorned with a scarf. No one will admit who did it. Someone has written "Good Luck Horseface" in chalk at its base. The tone is oddly affectionate. You overhear two senators, retired naturally, debating whether it's appropriate to cancel a dinner party in case of invasion. One insists that Attila was born under a damp star and thus can't be trusted with cutlery. The other counters with something about geese. You make your way back home by mid-morning, arms full of leaks and vague information. Rome is still standing, its stone bones wrapped in linen skies. The streets are full of gossip, yes, but also full of people buying cheese and sweeping doorways and haggling over the price of sandals. Historians still argue whether Rome truly feared Attila's approach or whether it had simply grown tired of being threatened by men with bad facial hair and grand titles. What is known: Attila turned away from Rome shortly after reaching its gates. What is less known is that the people inside had already begun quietly expecting the worst and baking extra bread just in case. You chew on a fig and try not to think too hard. Rome, after all, is good at enduring. It's already seen emperors, plagues, coups, floods, and at least one parrot that could recite the Aeneid. What's one more Hun? By midday, the sun is slouching over the rooftops like a bored senator. You trudge down the hill toward the Tiber, passing a laundry line that sags with tunics, underthings, and what might be ceremonial napkins. No one can tell anymore. The entire street smells faintly of wet linen, overcooked lentils, and civic uncertainty. Today is wash day, which is mostly an excuse for neighbors to gather by the communal troughs and discuss topics that are equal parts hygiene and hysteria. You arrive just in time to hear an old washerwoman declare that lice can sense historical moments and have been unusually jumpy this week. She's not wrong. The city's flea population does seem unusually ambitious lately. You settle beside a basin carved from stone, chisel marks still faintly visible. Your fingers soak into the water, which is colder than expected and possibly judging you. You scrub a stained tunic that's seen better centuries. It flops limply over the rock, refusing to foam, a metaphor for the entire empire, maybe. A girl beside you is plucking burrs from her brother's cloak and humming a tune about Emperor Honorius losing a chicken. You hum along. The song has a catchy melody and absolutely no historical accuracy. But accuracy isn't what people want today. They want distraction. And Rome, even on the eve of potential ruin, is very good at it. You spot a group of noblewomen gathering at the edge of the market, all pretending not to be panicking. One is holding a tiny dog wearing a laurel wreath. Another fans herself dramatically while muttering, "They say Attila drinks fermented milk straight from the goat." You're not sure if that's meant to be terrifying or impressive. A scribe walks past, dragging a cart full of tablets and ink, muttering about overdue prayers and bureaucratic backlogs. "The gods don't sign petitions," he grumbles, "but we file them anyway." You remember that mainstream historical fact? Roman bureaucracy was so vast and entrenched that even during times of invasion, official paperwork and tax collection often continued undisturbed. There are records of temple repairs and fish licenses being approved mid-siege. But not everyone is so calm. Near the Temple of Vesta, a small crowd is gathered to listen to a man who claims to be receiving visions from Mercury. He's barefoot, wild-haired, and surrounded by pigeons. He tells them to wear red ribbons and chew mint leaves for protection. One woman asks if basil works instead. He screams for 5 minutes. You wander toward the Subura district, Rome's famously chaotic quarter. It's quieter than usual today. Not silent, just soft around the edges. Kids play with knuckle bones. Mothers stir pots of onion stew, and an old man naps under a cart with a sign reading, "If Attila arrives, wake me after." You sit near the public fountain and stretch your back. A tunic sticks to your side. A dog sniffs your sandal and walks away unimpressed. There's something timeless about this moment, this great city creaking forward even as the clouds on the horizon shuffle ominously into place. You overhear a merchant mutter, "What if the Huns are just lost?" and a potter respond, "Then may the gods confuse their maps further." Historians still argue whether Rome's citizens genuinely believed Attila would sack the city or whether they considered the threat exaggerated like most things filtered through the senatorial grapevine. After all, Rome had been sacked before by the Gauls, the Visigoths, their own tax collectors. And each time the city grumbled, swept up the ashes, and went back to arguing about aqueduct repairs. Back at the laundry line, your tunic is finally drying in the sun. It flaps lazily in the breeze next to someone else's toga that has been mended so many times it resembles a philosophical question more than a garment. You feel the weight of the day settling in, too much light, not enough clarity. Rome is waiting, not with fear, but with that deep, sarcastic patience that only very old cities seem to have. The kind that mutters, "again," when threatened. Someone drops a bar of soap and a chicken steals it. The city is a mess, but a familiar one. A place where people pick lice and gossip about barbarians, where visions are shouted in the street, and tax forms outlive emperors. A city that forgets nothing, remembers selectively, and always continues washing its laundry one stained tunic at a time. The afternoon sun slants low and suspicious, casting golden shadows across the marble columns, like it's trying to eavesdrop on something. You drift past the forum where official things are supposed to happen, but today, even the pigeons look bored. You wander into the office of the scribe Rome's weary bureaucrats who are valiantly trying to continue pretending everything is fine. Scrolls pile up like uneaten lentils. Wax tablets are passed from desk to desk with expressions of mild panic and deep resignation. One official sighs so heavily that 2 ink pots fall over. A junior clerk with inky fingers hands you a form titled Non-Immediate Emergencies Barbarian Type. You fill in your name, your shoe size standard procedure, and your opinion on whether Attila the Hun might be allergic to figs. You mark possibly. At the far end of the room, an augur is reading chicken entrails. You're not sure if that's still a thing or if someone brought in a leftover lunch and it's being misinterpreted. Either way, a circle of scribes is formed, murmuring and nodding sagely as the augur gestures to a slightly bent liver and mutters, worrying curve. One mainstream historical fact: despite the rise of Christianity in Rome by this period, older traditions like augury and haruspicy, the reading of animal innards, still lingered in public consciousness, especially during moments of national dread when logic quietly packed its bags and fled. "See that," says a man behind you, pointing at a dark spot on the entrails. "Looks like Sardinia." That's not a sign, the augur says. That's a burn mark. Someone reheated this. Still, the mood is officially not great. Outside the office, a priest is trying to herd a group of mildly confused citizens into a ritual parade of some sort. Everyone wears yellow sashes and chants what might be a hymn or possibly a bread recipe. A boy with a flute joins in, mostly playing notes at random. You duck into a colonnade to avoid being swept into the procession and nearly bump into a man selling protection charms made from bits of broken statuary and herbs that smell like regret. He whispers that Attila fears garlic. You buy a sprig just in case. Further down, you overhear 2 senators debating a peace offer that might involve giving Attila honorary Roman citizenship. One argues, "He'll calm down if we flatter him." The other replies, "So would a donkey if you give it a seat in the Senate." Historians still argue whether Attila ever seriously intended to sack Rome, or whether his negotiations with Pope Leo XIV were theatrically political. Some say bribes were offered, others suggest divine intervention. A minority of scholars believe Attila took one look at the paperwork required to occupy the city and walked away on principle. In a quiet corner near the baths, you find a public bulletin board. Among the faded advertisements for poetry readings and goat-sitting services, someone has pinned a new notice, civil reminder. Please refrain from panicking until official panic is declared. You nod in agreement. Rome has always prided itself on scheduled chaos. An old man in a faded toga pulls up a stool beside you. You know he says thoughtfully, when the Gauls came, at least they knocked. He chuckles, sips something from a cracked cup, and adds, Attila won't last. These invaders never do. They arrive, stomp around, marry local girls, and before you know it, they're arguing about sewer maintenance. He offers you a sip. You decline. The liquid is green. As the light dims further, the city slips into that hour between effort and dinner when decisions are postponed, disasters are delayed, and everyone agrees to just be a little tired together. You pass a statue of Minerva wearing a scarf. Someone knitted hastily and left overnight. Beneath her, someone's written in charcoal, I bet she could take him. The augur reappears at a nearby corner, now attempting to read omens from a fallen sandwich. It's turkey, he announces solemnly. An eastern bird. A sign of diplomacy, no one questions him. At this point, why would they roam, rolls on paperwork in hand, chicken entrails on the table, and every citizen quietly negotiating with fate while nibbling olives and updating their wills on scrap parchment? Dinner arrives with a shrug. It's not a grand banquet, not a lavish affair with silver platters and lyre music. Just you, a clay bowl of lentil stew, and a crust of bread that squeaks faintly when broken. Not from age exactly, more like disapproval. You eat slowly, perched on a low stool in your neighbor's courtyard. The air smells of garlic dust and lightly overcooked hope. Around you, others settle in with similar meals, chickpeas, figs, a suspicious-looking sausage someone claims is boar adjacent. A dog watches from under the table with deeply judgmental eyes. Dinner conversation tonight is quiet meandering and about 4% about Attila. The rest is standard Roman fare, who's cheating on their taxes, whose mosaic tile work is falling apart, and whether anyone's seen Lucius lately? Probably joined the Huns. Always did like fur coats. You sip watered wine and listen as a young man insists he heard that Attila is 12 feet tall and rides a fire-breathing horse. His sister rolls her eyes and says, that's ridiculous. It was clearly ice-breathing. Someone else claims Attila speaks with snakes and eats maps. You look over your shoulder, half expecting to see him already there, standing politely in the doorway holding a gift basket. But no, just a cat, wearing a stolen sandal. One mainstream historical fact to chew on by the time Attila approached Rome in 452 CE. His reputation had been amplified by fear hearsay and solid public relations red panic. Though no confirmed attack ever reached Rome itself, his campaigns in northern Italy had already devastated entire regions. And people lacking modern news outlets did what people always do, filled in the gaps with wild imagination and anxious casseroles. You nibble on a fig. Your host, a middle-aged woman named Terentia, lights an oil lamp and mutters that the lighting makes her stew taste better. Everything feels more edible when you can't see it properly, she says. As dinner winds down, the city doesn't grow quiet so much as inward. Lamps flicker behind shutters, doors creak. Someone down the street drops a plate and curses in a very respectful tone. You wander back toward your building, passing a group of teenagers drawing chalkboards on the street, convinced that spiral doodles will confuse any invading army. A man in a faded soldier's cloak stands at the corner staring toward the horizon. You ask if he's heard any news. They say Attila turned south, he says, then east, then maybe got distracted by a thunderstorm. You both nod as if this makes sense. Maybe it does. Historians still argue whether Attila's decision to spare Rome was due to political pressure, exhaustion, diplomacy, or simply a well-timed thunderstorm. Pope Leo I is said to have met Attila and persuaded him to turn away, but whether it was divine presence or bribes or coincidence remains unclear. What is certain, no battle came. Rome lived another day. But you don't know that yet. Tonight, all you know is that the stars are dim behind a veil of clouds, that someone left olives on your doorstep, that your neighbor is loudly snoring through a dream about a horse tribunal, that the stones beneath your sandals feel older than anyone still arguing about them. You reach your doorway and pause. The street is still. The kind of stillness that only cities can manage, a stillness full of things tucked behind curtains, eyes half closed, ears perked. You hear a lute playing faintly somewhere badly, someone singing about a heroic loaf of bread. You don't ask questions. And maybe that's what Rome teaches you. Not how to fight or rule or bathe properly, but how to keep living anyway, to keep sitting down for stew, to keep laughing at lies, to keep drawing chalk on stones just in case. You open the door. Tomorrow might bring Hun's thunder or absolutely nothing. But tonight, it brings exactly what you needed, a little heat, a tired chair and a window just wide enough to let the moon see you sleep. The night deepens, and Rome exhales. You lie back on your straw mattress, eyes half closed, listening to the wooden beams above you creak with the soft complaint of old timber and older stories. Somewhere nearby, a fountain continues to gurgle gently like the city itself is dreaming too stubborn to fully sleep. Moonlight slants across the stone floor in little pools puddling against the cracked walls like spilled milk. The shutters rattle once, then hold still, as if they too are holding their breath. The city isn't quiet exactly, it hums. Faint footsteps echo from somewhere far off. A dog barks once, then thinks better of it. Somewhere a baby cries, and somewhere else a priest forgets the second verse of a hymn and just hums the rest. It is the night before everything might change. And yet you're still here, wrapped in an itchy wool blanket that's slightly too short, listening to the stories Rome tells herself in the dark. Your neighbor Lucia, the one with the goat, sings softly under her breath as she sweeps her stoop for the third time today. Keeps the bad spirits from nesting, she explains. You're not sure if she means literal spirits or bad feelings. Either way, she's not taking chances. You drift in and out of little thoughts, of the augur and his sandwich, of the chalk symbols in the alley, of that sign by the baths that read, "Please don't panic in the fountain." And then something odd. A quiet procession moves down the street, barely more than a handful of cloaked figures. They carry nothing, say nothing, but their presence is oddly calming. A ritual, a dream. It doesn't matter. Rome is like that, full of things that half exist between fact and fable. Maybe they're senators, maybe they're ghosts, maybe they're just people who can't sleep either. Mainstream historical fact, many Romans believed in a kind of household spirit, lairs who guarded their homes. Offerings of wine, bread, or salt were left at tiny altars to keep them happy. And on uneasy nights like this, small acts of reverence, real or performative, could feel like putting a bandage on the unknown. You light a stub of tallow candle, set it by your windowsill, and mutter a small phrase of thanks to no one in particular. Not a prayer, not really, more of a gesture, a nod to whatever might be listening. Outside, Rome settles deeper into itself. The birds have gone silent, and the wind changes its tone, less breeze, more breath. The street's empty completely now. Even the usual band of stray cats has vanished, as though something big is about to yawn. You stare up at the ceiling, watching shadows twitch in corners. You imagine Attila out there in the distance, sitting at a campfire, eating something roasted, staring into the same moon just from a different angle. Maybe he's already decided not to come. Maybe he's writing a poem. Historians still argue whether the fear of Attila was more psychological than tactical, a bogeyman used by Roman nobles to justify bad city planning. Some even suggest that by 452 CE, Rome was already too pitiful to sack properly. One scholar wrote, "Why sack a ruin? Let the wind finish it." But Rome never does finish. That's the trick. Even when you think it's done, it stretches, yawns, mutters something about bad plumbing, and keeps going. You roll to your side. Your blanket smells of sun dust and maybe onions. You let your eyes drift closed, lulled by the distant rhythm of old stone. Somewhere a chicken clucks once in its sleep. Somewhere else a man murmurs the names of all the emperors he can remember. He stops after 3. And that's enough. Let it all fade now. The creaking beams, the starlit tiles, the scent of ash on the wind. Let your breathing match the city's slow, patient soft around the edges. Rome has done this before. So have you. Forget the rumors, the chalk wards, the invisible horsemen in the distance. They belong to tomorrow. Right now it's just you in this room, and the stories that haven't asked anything of you. Your body sinks deeper into the straw. Your mind wanders lazily toward dreams that never quite begin. Everything stills. Even your thoughts begin to soften like wax under a gentle flame, melting into quiet shapes that don't need names. Outside, the moon leans on the shoulder of the skyline, watching over cracked rooftops and sleepy goats. Inside, your candle flickers once, then settles, just like you. No more augurs, no more bureaucracy, no more stew, just stone silence and sleep. The kind of night that doesn't ask questions, that only waits for the next morning to arrive slowly, softly, like bread rising under cloth. And when it does, whenever it does, you'll be ready. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight you rest. Hey guys, tonight we're following a day in the life of someone whose name you probably don't remember because no one ever wrote it down. You're not the knight, not the noble, not even the horse. You're the apprentice who lugs 100 pounds of metal around before breakfast. While your master gets all the glory, you're the one who keeps his armor polished, his boots dry, and his ego intact barely. You wake up just before the sky turns pale. Not from a rooster or a bell, but from the very specific weight of obligation pressing against your ribs. The tent canvas flaps gently, and the cold air sneaks in through the seams. You're stiff from sleeping on a burlap mat with one half-rotted fur for warmth. Your back feels like you fought a war in your dreams, which, to be fair, you probably did. The night snored in Latin again. You slide out of your bedding and immediately stub your toe on a helmet. Standard. Half of your job is locating pieces of armor that your master tossed off the night before in some kind of regal tantrum. You mutter an apology to your own foot and start collecting the bits, greaves, vambraces, cuirass, gorget, the whole medieval vocabulary test. Now comes the polishing. You crouch outside the tent with your bucket, a scrap of cloth, and a thick paste that smells like boiled onions in defeat. You scrub the dried mud from yesterday's tournament, the dents from last week's skirmish, and somehow a perfectly etched drawing of a chicken someone carved into the backplate as a joke. Historians still argue whether this chicken night graffiti was a common prank or symbolic protest. Either way, it's your problem now. While you work, your stomach growls. Breakfast isn't for another hour, and even then it's just barley porridge so watery it might qualify as a drink. You think about sneaking a bite of the hard cheese you stole yesterday from the supply tent, but then remember where you hid it inside the helmet, which is now on your head. The knight finally emerges. He's bleary-eyed, shirtless, and mumbling about a dream involving 3 dragons and a disloyal cat. He kicks a boot in your direction. You catch it on reflex. He doesn't say thank you, of course. Saying thank you is for people who don't have a family crest. You help him dress. It's less serving a noble cause and more trying to dress a drunk tree in tin foil. Chainmail goes first, and it's heavy. You hoist it up and over his head while he complains about the weight, which is ironic because you carried it here. The armor smells like sweat and the faint despair of missed inheritance. By the time he's fully armored, the sun is peeking over the hills. The camp is alive now, horses neighing, banners flapping, and someone shouting about who moved the ceremonial mace again. The knight slaps you on the shoulder hard. You'll make a proper squire one day, he says. You resist the urge to point out that technically you already are a squire, just not his. You trail behind him as he struts toward the training field, armor gleaming like a mirror, and not a speck of dried chicken left in sight. You wipe your hands on your tunic sigh and pick up the shield he left behind. It weighs more than your hopes and dreams combined. As you haul the shield across the mud, you pass a fellow apprentice who gives you a knowing nod. You return it. You both look like you aged 3 years overnight. He's dragging a poleaxe wrapped in laundry. No one asks why. And so the day begins. You've already broken a sweat, a toe, and possibly a vow of silence, but at least the armor shines. The training field stretches out like a patchy quilt of churned mud horse droppings and abandoned hopes. You arrive just in time to see your knight mount his steed with a practiced flourish that he's definitely rehearsed in private. His armor clinks in a vaguely heroic way, and someone nearby claps. It's probably his cousin. You meanwhile are already sweating through your tunic. Your job now is to remain unseen but completely essential, which means preparing every sparring tool, resetting every shattered lance, and quietly untangling things that were never supposed to tangle. Like the ceremonial tent ropes, or your knight's sense of humility. The lances are heavy, and they smell like varnished wood and goat fat. You stack them in an orderly line beside the jousting barrier, only for the knight to come over and dramatically choose the third one, because as he whispers with great importance, this one feels right. Historians still debate whether knights could actually sense which weapon would serve them best, or if this was just early medieval superstition mixed with a healthy dash of delusion. Once the sparring begins, your work turns reactive. The horses charge the lance's splinter, and you are the one who runs into the dust cloud to collect all the pieces. The broken tips go into one sack, the reusable shafts into another. You keep mental track of which lance fragments have nicknames now. One of them is Splinty, and you're weirdly fond of it. While the knight duels atop his horse with another equally smug noble, you are tasked with calming his second horse, the backup horse, the one he refuses to ride because its mane isn't bold enough. You stroke its neck, whisper apologies, and nearly get sneezed on in the face. You make a mental note to never, ever show affection again. Then comes the dismount practice, which means the knight jumps off his horse in ways that look impressive but feel unnecessary. You help reset the training dummy, a hay-stuffed sack with a vaguely human shape, and for some reason a mustache drawn in charcoal. Each time the knight slices through it, you pick it up again. Eventually, the mustache is on the back of its head. No one comments. A group of squires nearby is practicing with swords, and one of them manages to stab the ground and get his blade stuck. You watch fascinated as he tries to yank it free without losing dignity. He fails. Twice. You pretend not to notice. That's part of the unspoken code of squires' silent support, no laughter, unless it's the knight doing something ridiculous. Then you laugh quietly into your elbow. Around mid-morning, the knight calls for water. You jog to the barrel and fill his cup while avoiding a foot trap set by one of the more creative young archers. When you return, he nods in vague appreciation. This is your equivalent of a gold medal. You sneak a sip for yourself and nearly spit it out. It's warm, slightly mossy, and tastes like regret. Still better than last week when someone accidentally refilled the barrels from a frog pond. Just as you begin to think the morning drills are winding down, your knight decides to try a new spin attack on horseback. It goes poorly. His boot gets caught in the stirrup, and he ends up dangling sideways like a sack of flour with delusions of grandeur. You help untangle him while he insists it was a tactical maneuver. You nod solemnly. You will never mention this again, probably. As the bell for midday meal echoes through the field, you're sent to collect the practice targets. You drag the dummies back into the shed and stack them carefully, head to hayfoot, in neat rows that look mildly unsettling. One dummy is missing an arm and smells faintly of pickles. You choose not to question it. With the field mostly empty and the knight off to clean his gloves for lunch priorities, you take a moment to sit in the grass and stretch your back. Your arms are sore, your knees are muddy, and your hands smell like old leather and panic. But there's a strange peace to it, too. The wind rustles the pennants. A distant lute plays from the camp, and a chicken walks past wearing what looks suspiciously like chainmail scraps. You don't stop it. You're not paid enough to get involved. Lunchtime, such as it is, arrives with no fanfare and the scent of overcooked barley wafting from the camp kitchens. You follow the others to the feeding area, which is optimistically called the mess. It lives up to the name. Your knight, of course, eats at the high table under a canopy stitched with his family's crest. Two foxes fighting over a crown they clearly can't wear. You, on the other hand, squat near the latrine trench halfway between the cook fire and a pile of armor scraps. The bench here is a repurposed fence post, and the only view is a duck staring at you with judgment. You pull out your wooden bowl and wait in line for stew. It's thin grayish and smells faintly of turnips that lost the will to live. The cook plops a ladleful into your bowl without making eye contact. You murmur thanks like you mean it. As you settle down to eat, your spoon promptly snaps. This is not surprising. You retrieve the backup spoon you keep in your boot for just such moments. It's slightly scorched and shaped more like a miniature shovel, but it does the job. You make a mental note, whittle a new one tonight if your fingers still function. The meal around you is a chorus of slurps, muttering, and arguments. Today's hot topic: cabbage taxes. Your knight is loudly insisting that cabbage shouldn't be taxed unless it has been visibly pampered. His opponent, a particularly nasal squire, claims that cabbage pampering is subjective. This goes on for 15 minutes. You finish your stew and consider whether cabbage deserves this much attention. Historians still argue whether these vegetable disputes were symbolic of deeper feudal tensions or just a symptom of poor seasoning. Midway through your lunch, a page runs by shouting something about a goat in the grain tent. No one reacts. This is at least the third time this week. You sigh, grab a crust of bread, and stand to follow, partly because it's technically your job, mostly because the goat might have found something edible. You locate it near the storage sacks, gnawing enthusiastically on a bundle of parchment. You shoo it away and salvage what you can. One document seems to be an official announcement about the upcoming joust. Another, oddly, is a love poem about onions. No one claims authorship, which is honestly for the best. Back at camp, it's time to clean up after lunch. You rinse your bowl with the last of your drinking water and hang your spoon on your belt like a trophy. The knight tosses his trencher into a barrel without even glancing at you. Naturally, it misses. You retrieve it because of course you do. Now comes the worst part of midday idle orders. These are tasks invented by bored nobles who think they're helping the war effort, but are actually just making lists. Today, your knight wants you to go through his travel chest and find that one sock that doesn't betray the shape of my ankle. You know exactly which one he means, and it's currently being used as a pouch for arrowheads. You nod politely and prepare to go rummaging. As you dig through his belongings, mostly moth-bitten tunics, spare gloves, and what appears to be a petrified lemon, you reflect on how little anyone really notices the work you do. You are the one who keeps the sleeves unwrinkled, the boots upright, and the horse from eating his saddle again. You're the silent engine behind his pomp. And the truth is, no one remembers the name of the apprentice who remembered to oil the elbow joints. You find the sock miraculously intact and deliver it with quiet triumph. The knight doesn't even look up. He's busy sketching an improved helmet design that involves horns, feathers, and what appears to be a built-in snack shelf. You nod like this is very wise. A bell chimes from across camp. Afternoon drills will begin soon. But there's a brief window now, a strange suspended hour when even the goats seem to nap. You perch on a stack of firewood and let your eyes close. The breeze carries the scent of wood smoke, trampled herbs, and someone's suspiciously singed trousers. You don't fall asleep. You're not that reckless, but you do allow yourself a moment. Just one. The duck waddles past again, still judging. Just as the duck disappears around the corner, you hear the unmistakable clink of armor and the clipped bark of your knight shouting, "Where is my left gauntlet?" This is how most of your afternoons begin, with sudden panic over a missing object that was almost certainly not your fault. You scramble up dust hay from your tunic and jog toward the knight's tent. The gauntlet in question is eventually discovered under a pile of parade banners, because of course it is, and smells faintly of lavender. You decide not to ask. He scolds you anyway, though his eyes betray that he knows it was his own doing. You nod patiently, apologize for the wind, and help him gear up again. His wrists are swollen from the morning's bravado, so the gauntlets take longer to fasten. You quietly wonder if anyone in history has ever needed a hand massage and a personality adjustment at the same time. Once outfitted, he heads toward the tilt yard to review the junior knights. You follow with the spare weapons, a cloth for wiping down visors, and a fresh roll of linen bandages just in case the review turns physical. It usually does. The practice field is more chaotic now. Apprentices are running drills, lords are inspecting everyone like cattle at auction, and someone's hawk is stuck in a laundry line. As the knight barks critiques at a younger squire who looks moments from tears, your role is quiet. Hand him the right weapon at the right time. Keep the horse from chewing the banners and subtly mop the sweat pooling in his boots. Yes, you've done that more than once. Today's big errand comes in the form of an urgent request. The knight's favorite saddle ointment has gone missing. It's a blend of goose fat, crushed mint, and some unknown resin that makes it smell like a tavern candle. He says it's essential for keeping the saddle supple and my spirits high. You nod once again, suppressing all visible amusement, and set off for the quartermaster's tent. The camp sprawls unevenly across a hill, and walking it in half-worn shoes should technically count as penance. Along the way, you pass a duo of monks debating the color of divine fire, a pair of blacksmiths arguing about what qualifies as a properly rebellious horseshoe, and a cat that appears to be the unofficial mayor of a firewood pile. You reach the apothecary and are greeted by the smell of vinegar, thyme, and mild regret. The man inside wears a robe so stained it might be growing its own herbs. He hands you a jar of ointment, or jam depending on the temperature. You hope it's the former and jog back up the hill, praying it won't melt through the cloth pouch you've wrapped it in. Back at the training ground, your knight is trying to lecture a young noble on footwork, but he's too distracted by a blister on his heel. You kneel down to check it and suppress a wince. It's the size of a silver coin and almost as shiny. You clean it carefully, apply a salve, and wrap it while he complains about the stitching in his boots. You say nothing, but mentally note-talk to the cobbler, bribe him with goat cheese if necessary. Historians still debate whether squires truly doubled as field medics, or if most of them just got very good at improvising. You are squarely in the yes and with no thanks category. After the wound is dressed and the saddle ointment returned, the knight dismisses you with a wave. You bow instinctively and begin the long loop of putting everything away. Swords to the weapons tent, shields back on their racks, and gauntlets. You guessed it, placed somewhere they can be easily lost again by tomorrow morning. The afternoon light is gold now, and the camp starts to shift into its softer rhythm. Banners are rolled down the blacksmith's hammer slower, and even the hawk has found its way out of the laundry line. You make one last round to check the horses, offer them an extra handful of oats, and scratch one behind the ears. It snorts happily and sneezes directly into your face. You wipe it off with your sleeve and mutter, "Thanks, noble steed." It's not sarcasm, not entirely. With the knight busy at council, where he'll almost certainly fall asleep during someone else's speech, you finally get a moment to soak your hands in a bucket of cool water. The grime loosens. The aches don't. But then again, no one carries a knight's weight without carrying the ache too. Evening creeps in like a slow spill of ink across parchment. The colors of the camp soften armor, dulled by sunset torches flickering to life, shadows lengthening behind horses and tents. You trail behind your knight as he struts back from council, complaining loudly about the lack of dessert and how Sir Reginald's elbows were audibly smug. You make the right noises, a low hum here, a sympathetic chuckle there. It's part of the role. Your back aches. Your legs feel like lead, and you still haven't eaten anything since that crust of bread you shared with the goat. The knight decides it's time to inspect the sleeping quarters, which really just means standing in the middle of the tent while you do all the actual arranging. You roll out his bedding, first padded wool, 2 blankets, a stuffed pillow that smells faintly of lavender and victory. Then yours, a frayed mat, half a candle stub, and whatever corner the rain hasn't found yet. Tonight, the ground is damp. The knight demands a foot soak. Of course he does. You fill a basin with warm water from the nearby fire pit, mix in a pinch of herbs you hope are calming, and help him settle his noble feet into the tub. He sighs deeply, like a man who just conquered a kingdom instead of argued about fig rations. While he soaks, he gestures vaguely at his journal and asks you to write something inspiring. You pick up the quill and scribble a note about valor and destiny, subtly referencing the blister from earlier. He doesn't notice, but you feel better. Soon enough, he's snoring softly in his bedroll, one arm over his head, mouth slightly open like a heroic statue with allergies. You quietly extinguish the torch, double-check that the flaps are tied shut against the breeze, and ease down into your spot. You shift your saddlebag out from under your back. It's your pillow tonight, and try to find a dry patch. Outside, a drizzle begins. Light, rhythmic, not yet intrusive. You listen to it tap against the canvas, a gentle syncopation to your tired thoughts. Somewhere in the distance, a lute plays a half-forgotten tune. You stare up into the dark fabric of the tent ceiling and let your breath slow. Today you carried weapons gossip, a saddle full of secrets, and the weight of a knight who'll never know how much easier his life is because of you. You remembered every detail except your own name, because no one ever asks for that part. You're just boy, or you, or fetch the ointment. Historians rarely note the ones like you. There are no statues, no songs, no great epics about the one who kept the left gauntlet dry during the great mudfall of last Thursday. And yet there you are, every day, a quiet force behind the clang and pageantry. Some scholars still debate whether squires formed true emotional bonds with their knights. Others say it was simply duty. You're not sure which side you're on, but you do know you once took a lance in the shin for this man because he walked directly into the path of a joust while adjusting his tunic. You said nothing. You just limped. Now the camp sleeps. A few distant snuffles, a hiccuping horse, and the soft groan of canvas in wind. You curl into yourself, pulling the thin blanket up to your chin, and let the aches dull into something like peace. Tomorrow it will all happen again. The same armor, the same orders, the same missing gauntlet. But for now, you are still. For now you are warm. For now you've done enough. And as the drizzle continues, you find yourself drifting. The soft rhythm on the tent, the hush of snores from distant tents, and the deep hush that settles over a tired camp after a long day, they all cradle you like lullabies without melody. You lie there with your hands folded on your stomach, still faintly smelling of oil and rosemary. The ache in your shoulders begins to loosen. Your feet, sore from running through puddles and mud, finally rest. Every breath in brings the scent of wood smoke, damp wool, and something sweet, maybe someone spilled mead nearby. It doesn't matter. Nothing pressing now, no shouts, no lances, no lists, just the long exhale of night. Maybe tomorrow you'll get a real piece of meat with lunch. Maybe the left gauntlet will stay where it's meant to. Maybe the knight will even remember your name. Or maybe not. But that's fine too. Because tonight the world is soft. Your eyes close without effort. The quiet hum of the camp becomes a lullaby made of life, of labor, of strange dignity in small things. The fire outside crackles low, and the rain falls a little slower now. Let it all fade, the armor, the errands, even the duck. You've done enough. Good night.